Hey, what's up guys? It's another video from the SourceFind Asia vlog. It's Rico here, CEO of SourceFind Asia. And it's been a while. I was traveling the vast majority of April, early May, and traveled to a couple different countries. I'm gonna have videos about that. And when I got back immediately, I was off to the races and just like visiting factories, going to conferences. The Canton Fair happened as well. So I have a bunch of videos around my travels, and I have some videos around what I did during the Canton Fair. I actually took a small group of people from an event, which brings me to the title of this video. This is the Cross-Border Summit Manufacturing Panel. So the Cross-Border Summit, it's a third year, it's an annual event organized by Michael Michelini and his team, Global from Asia. That's the name of his company, Global from Asia podcast, also China Business Cast. If you want to check those out, those are two great podcasts. Actually, I was listening to those before I came to China. They're part of what was inspiring me during those early days. I've been going to the Cross-Border Summit since the first event back in 2015. And at the time, me and Michael Michelini, I call him Michelini, put too many mics in my life. I call him Michelini. We were partners in Inter-China at the time. Anybody that wants to know a little bit about that, you can check out the podcast that I did with Nick Ramil. It was part 1, part 2. I'll link it up in the show notes. So we were working on Inter-China, and I knew him from before because of his content, the podcast, and all that. And first Cross-Border Summit was one day. It was a decent sized event. I'd say about 50 to 80 people. Good quality speakers. I was fresh faced. I think I'd been running SFA for, it was 2016 by the way. I think I'd been running SFA for about just a little bit less than a year, like 9 months, something like that. So I went there, and I'm still learning. I'm still growing with the sourcing thing, and of course I still am. But I was lucky enough to, sit and watch a couple very, very experienced sourcing entrepreneurs who'd been in China for 10, 15 years. One guy's name was Mike Bellamy. I think he was the guy that stood out the most to me. And I remember sitting in the crowd and being like, next year I want to be on stage. So cut to 2017, Michelini asked me to be on a manufacturing panel. So I did that. That was last year. And it was cool because I was literally the youngest person on that panel, and it was nice to be seen as one of the peers and respected on that level. And then this year again, the second year was bigger than the first. The first year, like I said, was only 1 day. Second year was 2 days. This year was 3 days. Technically, I would say 5, if you include the trip that we took when we took a small group of guys from the event to the Canton Fair. And like I said, I'm gonna have a video about that. But so this was on the second day. This video is a full video unedited of our manufacturing panel. On the panel was myself, Andy Church, who's been on my podcast before. He's one of my mentors. Damon Barnhurst. I'll link up his full name in the show notes. But Damon was there, and it was also hosted by, I'm blanking on the name right now, but anyways, I'll have his name as well in the show notes. But yeah, it was a good panel. I say it's like a 20 something minute panel. I think very good questions. The crowd was engaged. Again, it's just nice I enjoy doing this. It's part of the reason. Obviously this helps me get clients, creating content, but I do like giving advice on manufacturing in China, and it's a very, very fascinating place. And so for me to be on stage getting my speaking credits up is awesome. And definitely, if you're thinking about coming to China next year on the Canton Fair in April, May, definitely consider the Cross-Border Summit 2019. And also me and Michelini are still working on a few things, and I think I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but we're thinking about bringing over some people, outside of the Canton Fair, but just bringing, a small group of people, like 5 to 6 people that we could put through a sort of accelerator program where you'd come and work in my office with me on a daily basis and my team, and by the end of the program, fully source your product, vet and fully source a supplier. So we're putting that together, but the Canton Fair run that we did was kind of a test, and I think it was successful. Definitely learned a lot from that experience in terms of what not to do, and sort of just what it is to manage a group of 5-6 people who are in China for the first time, right? Beyond that, other announcements, if you're in my email list, you probably got an email last week. We're in a beta launch stage of our design for manufacturing service, which is basically we have hired a fantastic industrial designer who has experience doing industrial design, DFM for Colombian or South American manufacturers and Chinese manufacturers. And essentially what that means is we can take a crudely drawn hand sketch on a napkin all the way up to 3D to 2D, like colored 2D to 3D to CAD, which would also be formatted correctly for manufacturers. So if you want to know more about that, send over an email. My contact information is in the description below. Without further ado, enjoy the video.
We're all still here and we're all still alive, right? I'll say that again. We're all still here and we're all still alive, right? Okay. Thank you very much for being responsive. It's been a really very much a great value add yesterday and today, and we're going to contribute to more of that value add with this panel discussion. So I just take a little bit of time and do something that I'm not very fond of, which is reading off a piece of paper while I'm standing addressing a group. But I want to give credit where credit's due, and we have 3 excellent panelists with us today. My name's Michael Eagleton. I have a small e-commerce company that I'm bootstrapping, and we'll talk about that some other time. But what I'd like to do is to welcome Andy Church. Now, Andy and I have known each other for quite some time. Andy has spent over 20 years here in China, and he's a problem solver for quality and insights into quality service. In fact, he has the preeminent business and a great team that works together in resolving and making that quality issue as it should be for clients. Please give a round of applause for Mr. Andy Church. Third-party sourcing with quality agency, manufacturing, quality assurance. 12 years living in China, but he still spends a great deal of time here, but spends more time in the US now. And I'd also like to welcome here with me Mr. Rico Ngoma. And Rico is the CEO of SourceFind Asia. SourceFind Asia is a sourcing consulting company based in Guangzhou. And today's the first time we've actually met Rico, but I've heard many good things about your company prior to today. You'll be pleased to hear that, right? Yeah, of course. And please give a round of applause for Rico there. And I'd also like to welcome here with me Damon Barnhurst, marketplace creativity expert with Cooler Brands. And Damon is big on education and STEM and working with makers, and not just and young makers as well. And I'm sure that you're going to give a good sharing on that too. So our topic for today is actually about productivity and manufacturing, should I say, manufacturing. Let me have a look at this so that I get it right. Manufacturing and product development today. All of us have experience in manufacturing, and I'd like to kick off by giving each of the speakers a short opportunity to give their insight into what would be the most common mistake in manufacturing today. And can we start with Rico there, because you've got that mic in your hand, right?
Most common mistake, we were kind of talking about this before, is just not prepping prior to starting an order and having unrealistic timelines. So I don't know if I should go deeper into that right now because I feel like that was going to be another discussion topic, but should I?
Yes, please.
All right, so I think a lot of times people don't understand that, you know, China isn't a giant Walmart. You don't just go and find a product and pick it out. Like, you have to take all the appropriate steps prior to starting an order, which is making sure that you have all your design files, making sure that you know your product just as well as the factory, if not better, because a factory is not going to design a product for you. You need to be able to give them as much direction as possible. One of my friends, Nick, is in the audience, and he's going through a process right now where he's having to educate factories on his product, even though he's been selling his product for 2 years. He's been selling his product for 2 years, but like every single time you work with a factory, they have their own understanding of what they think foreign clients want, and then you have your own expectations. So you have to take that time early on, and then just giving yourself enough time for your actual production, because things always pop up, whether it's delays in getting raw materials, or if there's quality control issues, being able to have the time, have the buffer in your timeline to allow the factory to fix those things.
So realistic scheduling and preparation are a key one there. Andy, would you like to take?
Well, I'm going to echo exactly what Rico said, and something the previous speaker mentioned about you can't outsource something if you don't know the process yourself. And I think that's what Rico's saying, and what I'm going to say is that you can't have something manufactured. If you have an idea and you want to have it manufactured, you need to know the ins and outs of that product. And whether that's starting with a prototype and making something out of a Pringles can initially, or whatnot, you need to know the ins and outs and be prepared. Because if you're not prepared via timelines, the material, the costing, to getting into retail, or retail being Amazon Marketplace, or into a brick and mortar retailer, if you don't have the understanding of all the costs built into that, then you're not going to be able to understand and have a realistic price point. So being prepared, know the ins and outs of all the things that can go wrong will be beneficial much later.
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough to benefited from 15 years of working in manufacturing here in Dongguan. And one other thing that I found that was something that a lot of my clients, customers weren't aware of, was some of the issues that factories actually have in lead times for sourcing different materials, where they're coming from, whether they're imported, these kind of things, which also affect what they can do. You know, the answer to every question in China is going to be yes, but that might not necessarily be the result. Damon?
Yeah, my niche here is a little unique in that the community that I represent focuses more on the product development, where we would end up going to a factory with that product idea that was built. But what we do in our community is we provide for the inventor who has their idea a platform to get some social proof and to get some capital that they can raise within our community, so that they have something that will actually stand when they've been willing. You can go the traditional route where you spend a lot of money and hope that it works. In my community, in Cooler Brands, you can test out your idea, have 5,000 people in a community look at it and give you feedback and suggestions. We can have a prototype built and we can test it and give you feedback before it goes to a crowdfunding campaign and before it goes into the mass market. So in Cooler Brands, we develop relationships with factories and with sales channels to take the idea to the masses. Unique model for us is, if you want to take a product maybe more offline and develop an actual company from that, but you don't have the capital or you don't have the social media presence to really push that idea, you can submit that idea to my community and we can take a look at it. If we like it, we will crowdfund it. we will brand and market it, and we will sell it, and we will leverage larger sales systems like Amazon and retail stores to sell for you. And we do all that with no cost up front from an inventor or from a creative mind. The money paid back to the Kula brands comes in the form of a percentage of royalties. So you're getting your product launched through our community, and the community's not getting paid, or you're not having to pay the community until your product is actually successful out in the marketplace and selling.
Excellent, excellent. Actually, I've got a client in the US, came up with an idea, sent me a hand-drawn sketch of a product concept that he wanted to build. He said, Michael, can you help us build this? And I looked at the drawing, this hand sketch. You know, it looked like Leonardo da Vinci had done it after a couple of beers one night, and I thought, gee, I can't take this to a factory or anyone. You know, like it had some notations on it. Look, when it comes to manufacturing and product development today, Andy, what do you find is one of the most common things that you're being called on to address? And now that could be a need, or it could be a problem. I'd just like some idea about that.
Well, that's pretty broad. Yeah, I think that
You can narrow that down.
yeah, for somebody who has a napkin sketch idea, we do limited product development because it's so time consuming. That isn't that's a service offering we have, but most of the people that we work with aren't funded, and a lot of that we do is is giving back and just helping somebody be successful with an idea. Now that I know Damon's offering, there might be a channel. So I think, to answer your question, most people just don't know where to start. They don't take the time to educate themselves. There is so much resource on the internet that people Google, how do I get something made? And then they immediately think, they scan the napkin sketch and send it to a factory, and the factory, they just said, nobody's replying to me.
Yeah.
Well, why would they? I mean, you're not really sending anything that they can use to quote. Factories today get hundreds of quotes a week, and people question, well, why aren't they sending me free samples? I mean, there's a cost to all that, and so I think that the biggest thing that we have with customers, be it product development or somebody wanting to source something or already sourcing and they're having a problem, is they don't take the time to educate themselves on what the obstacles are or what's the root cause, and be it how do I get a prototype made, or how do I address shipment delays, whatever that is. So it's self-education.
Right, yeah, such an important aspect really, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier about understanding the process, getting involved there. So making time to look in a little deeper and under the cover and understand some of that, just so important.
I mean, one last comment is we're all in business and service providers, and we exist to educate and problem solve for our customers. But there's an expectation that if you're not willing to learn on your own, really what ownership, or what are you going to do when somebody suggests or gives you the direction? Our clients need to take ownership,
Yeah.
and we're willing to provide direction. But there's an onus on the part of our the customer.
Yeah, so for my client in the US that sent me that hand sketch drawing, we actually put together CAD for him, and then helped him into identifying a prototype supplier that he could work with in order to go and build out. So Rico, do you have any comments there into this area?
Yeah,
and I'd like to give you a second one as well, something to think about, for us all to think about, which is contracts. Do they really matter in China?
I like how you set that up. That was my topic, by the way. Yeah, I think just going off of Andy's point, I find myself educating my clients a lot on the business cultural differences between the West and China. So getting them to understand that they're receiving thousands of inquiries a day off of Alibaba, getting them to understand that they're not, like a factory's not going to find your project attractive if they're having to literally design the product for you. Also getting them to understand that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, factories were dealing with huge orders, and now they're having to sort of niche down and work with smaller buyers. And a lot of factories, especially the ones that were maybe offline before, are not really accustomed to that. So you really have to, you're almost selling yourself to the factory. Like if you want a factory to take on your project and take it very seriously, it's the reverse of what it used to be. Like you can walk in as a foreigner before and factories would treat you like a king, but now they're so used to that you need to really present yourself in an attractive manner and show them that you're prepared and you're going to make the process of, they can focus on producing the product, and then you can give them the direction they need to make the product that you're looking for.
Good. And Damon, do you have any comments on this in this area? And I'm also going to ask the same question for you, which is contracts. You know, do they really matter in China today?
I'm not so aware of that. I'm looking for invention ideas, and we have contracts within our organization, our community, but I can't comment per se on that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, contracts. I think, yes, they do and they don't. Me and Andy actually did a podcast on this same topic. But I think it's one of my favorite topics.
And it's available on Global from Asia, right?
Made in China podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think the importance is, again, going back to presenting yourself in a professional manner, having contracts in place does that, and then you're also setting expectations with the factory. So treat the contract as more of a sort of mutual agreement, but it's not something that you're probably going to pursue legally. But the process of going through that is saying, this is what I'm buying from you, these are my expectations in terms of quality, these are my expectations in terms of timeline. If you don't meet these expectations, this is what we're going to do. Whether it's a fine, or they're giving you additional product, or they're remaking the product, treat it like that. Like if you, it's good to go through that process, but don't think that you're going to take them to court. And then it's presenting yourself in a professional manner. So you should set up contracts, but it's not necessarily going to be legally binding in that sense.
Right, so contracts are an excellent way to form a framework to create a common understanding that you can work together with your manufacturer with. It might not be something that if there was an issue later that you could actually rely on as being something that's going to give you legal recourse.
I think it was Chris Davey earlier that mentioned he was at the Canton Fair and saw a design of his in a factory's booth, and he went and he had recourse because he had a contract in place. So I think that contracts are vital in setting expectations with your supplier, also your customer, with your customers. I mean, Rico and I are, in like businesses, and so the expectation is if a client comes to us and says, the most common, question right off the bat, can you send me an NDA? And so, the recourse of an NDA, whether it's, a Hong Kong entity, or I'm based in Texas, and ours is, the county of Dallas in Texas, but an NDA sets the framework, and if that's very important.
And what about the importance of having, whether it be a non-disclosure, non-compete, or even a manufacturing contract agreement, having that in two languages, Chinese and English?
Important, but make sure that the contract specifies what language takes precedence. So if I'm signing a contract with, my clients, and it's going to be in English. If we're signing a contract with a supplier, or my client is signing a contract with the factory, and it's bilingual in English and Chinese, then they would have the contract state, the English takes precedence. If a factory provides a contract, typically it would say Chinese is the language if there's any conflict in the two.
Right.
Just to give you an idea of what kind of contracts we are setting in place, like Andy mentioned an NDA, and then I usually do, if we have original designs, NDA, and then sales agreement. So the NDA is obviously non-disclosure. Sales agreement is discussing what's being produced, and like I mentioned before, timeline, quality control, things like that. I have actually had a situation where a client of mine signed an NDA with a factory, and the factory started selling one of her designs on their website. And we just emailed the factory and said, we've signed an NDA with you guys, you're not supposed to be selling this product, and they took it down the next day. So I think a big part of that is just making sure that the factories that you work with, that you're doing a lot of vetting up front, because the factories that are really focused on producing, they will adhere to the contract. They don't necessarily want to get into any legal issues with their clients.
Okay, good. So, you know, one of the things that that interests me is actually I'm hearing a lot about 4.0 and you know, the maker movement, for example, and moving away from mass production to more localized, customized production. So, I'm just going to raise this as two words and look to see how you might apply this in your own minds to manufacturing and product development. Tomorrow, today.
One of the greatest things I love about Facebook is it comes up with 8 years ago today. Something in my, I guess this morning when I read it, I didn't think about how appropriate it would be, but apparently I was in a factory 8 years ago, and my comment on Facebook was, I can't believe this factory just told $1 billion retailer they're not interested in their business. I'll have to go back and look at my notes because I want to see, remember where I was and whatnot. But yesterday, that factory said no, and earlier Rico was talking about, factories, the orders have changed. Where years ago, they were only working with larger orders, or maybe factories were only working with small orders, and now they're working with bigger customers. So the way we did business today isn't going to be the way that we business tomorrow. Be it in my industry specifically, we do a lot of inspections. That's the majority of our business in sourcing. So if you're not doing inspections today on your product, you ought to be doing them tomorrow because there's changes coming in e-commerce world. Right now, products subject is for sale on Amazon aren't under the CPSC jurisdiction, or at least not being subject to CPSC oversight. And if you don't know what the CPSC is, then you need to go online and look. So if you're not doing any quality proactiveness efforts today, you ought to be tomorrow. And if you are today, you're doing inspections, then tomorrow or next year down the road, how do you spend your money smarter by instead of inspecting every inspection, you go to skip lot inspections or whatnot. So the way you do business today needs to be better and smarter and more strategic in the future. And you can apply that to every facet, be it quality, sourcing, communication, and so I think that there's a ton of examples, and I go back to my Facebook quote today, is that factory, it's fascinating, and I wonder where they are today. I'll have to go back and look, and because if you're not evolving, then you're going to go out of business.
Yeah, I would say having collaboration is the business model of the future. Collective intelligence within your organization. As we've built our organization, we have ideas and groups coming to us, and we put all boots on the ground. It's amazing what opens up. We have everyday average people opening up big accounts for us. People that are just introducing us to partners and things. So collective intelligence within your group and working together collaboratively is definitely the model of the future.
When I think about today, tomorrow, my business partner, who's been in China for 10 years, when he first started sourcing, he would always be every day in the markets, walking around, negotiating, finding products for his clients. And then when I think about when we became partners, I rarely leave my office. Everything's done online. I'm mostly going to offices when we're at a stage where we're negotiating with our final suppliers. So, and I think about tomorrow, I think there's just going to be more open communication done through online platforms where you're basically finding a factory, going on a virtual tour, setting up the order, QC, all done on one sort of online software. That's what I think about. I think just systemizing things through the internet with more open communication. There's a few factories right now that do this already, like factories that have virtual tours up, or factories that have cameras in their facilities, and as they're producing, they can send you live video showing you what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's coming.
Sure, I've seen a couple of those myself. actually have a client in Europe who has video. He's got access to the video line into the production area. Plus, he has a special camera set up on one of the boards because the factory has these efficiency boards with metrics, and he gets to look in on that. I see him commenting every now and then. All right, look, what I'd like to do is maybe open it up to our audience because there may well be one or two or more questions that are more. Does anyone here have a yes? Thank you. We'll start with Diego.
Hello, guys. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm an industrial design manager. I've been in China for the last 7 years, so I'm pretty involved with everything that has to do with manufacturing and product development. My question is going to be about the future of China in terms of manufacturing and product development itself. What I'm saying that we know that the Chinese economy is growing, and China is going to be the victim of its own success. It turns that it's not going to be cheap enough to produce in China in the future. They know that, and that's why they're trying to change the economy from manufacturing to services. At the same time, they're opening the new Silk Road, which is going to help other communities in different countries along the sea. Hello? Yeah. Just like, all right. So, so then what happened is, how do you see that manufacturing is going to be in China in the next 10 years? Regarding that, maybe it's going to be moving to Southeast Asia countries, or at the same time they are investing a lot in automation and also like 3D printing and all these things. So I want to know maybe if China is going to become a global R&D center with manufacturing in countries around China, or what's your opinion, I mean, for all the members of the panel? Thank you.
I think in terms of technology, China's so far ahead and so much larger than all of the surrounding countries that it's going to take a very long time for those countries to get like all the CNC machines and stuff like that. These are like $500,000 machines, and not that many suppliers in the smaller countries can afford that machinery. So from that perspective, products that require a lot of machine work, I think is still going to be in China in the next 10 years. But obviously, products that are a little bit easier to make and that require more labor are being outsourced to Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia, and I think that's where it's going in terms of that.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a migration of some of the labor-intensive products to lower labor cost countries, but there isn't anywhere in Asia that has the infrastructure of China. I mean, India may have the population and it's cheap labor-wise, but there isn't the infrastructure road-wise to get goods from factories to port. So, I think that over the next 10 years, we'll see continued automation in China as factories have to battle the currency fluctuations. I mean, we look at what the renminbi is right now and that. So there's nowhere that's going to take over. China isn't going to become a service economy in 10 years. But it's going to continue to evolve.
And there's another aspect there that some people may not be aware of, but one that's certainly visible when I'm travelling in China, which is that China has the option of moving from developed areas, but manufacturing centres like southern China, into the inner provinces within China where the costs are lower and different things like that. So that may change it a bit more.
I could only add that there will be more entrepreneurs when there's less factory workers, and more educating, giving more opportunities for people to be their own boss.
All right, any other questions out there? No? All right, actually perfect timing. So we'd like to, I'd just like to ask you all to give a special round of applause. Andy Church is a proud sponsor here for the event. Last year, the first year, and again this year. It's great to have you. We look forward to continuing cooperation for Rico and also for Damon. Thank you. Thank you.